Marina, and in this video I'll show you how to make a little bracelet like this one using a spool of knitting wire, some seed beads size 6/0, a pair of 3¼ needles, that's US size 3, a sewing needle, and scissors. I'm using double pointed needles only because they are shorter. You can use any pair of 3¼ needles that you have and make this lovely bracelet. Now that we have all supplies in place, let's get started. Step 1. Thread 84 beads on the wire. Take the spool of wire and find the end. It's usually in this little slot. Unwind a couple times and then put the wire back into the slot, because otherwise it's gonna all spring loose and will cause you a lot of trouble later on. And do that every time. When you need wire, take it out of the slot, unwind a few times and put it back in. The knitting wire has little memory, that's why it gets loose. That's a good thing because your bracelet won't get damaged. But it's a bad thing because you need to take care of putting it back into the slot and making your stitches tighter when you knit. But before we get to knitting, we need to thread the beads on. Take beads one by one and thread them on the wire. You need to have 84 beads. That's about a tablespoonful of beads. And the beads that we use are regular seed beads, size 6/0. When you have 84 beads on the wire, then we'll be ready for the next step. And these are the last 4 beads for me. I have 84 of them on the wire right now. If you're not sure about the bead count, add a few extra beads just in case. It's usually much easier to remove them afterwards than adding them later on when you realize you don't have enough beads. So it's better to put a few extra ones. Put extra ones as well if you want to make the bracelet longer. The one that we are making is 18 centimeters, 7 inches in circumference. If you want a longer bracelet for a bigger wrist, then add a few extra beads. Basically, they should be in multiples of 3 beads because every row of the bracelet has 3 beads on it. For now, we have the wire, we have the beads on the wire, and we are ready for the next step. Step 2. Cast on 4 stitches. In this step, we would need the needles. First, make a slip knot. Any way you know is good, as long as you get the slip knot like that. And pull the knot really tight. As I mentioned before, this wire has little memory, so every knot has to be pulled really tight. I'm out of wire, so I would unwind it a couple more times and then put it back into the slot before I start making more stitches. Place the slip knot on your left hand needle and then cast on 3 more stitches using backward loop cast on. So basically I'm making a loop, placing it on the needle, pulling tight, loop on the needle, pull tight, make a loop, place it on the needle and pull tight. Now we have 4 stitches here, including the slip knot, and we are all good to move on to make the main part of the bracelet. Step 3. Work in garter stitch with beads. We'll be working on these 4 stitches in garter stitch, placing beads here and there. The row 1 would be plain row. We simply knit all stitches. So you insert the needle into the stitch, wrap it with the wire. It feels a bit different than working with yarn. And remember to make your stitches really tight. Otherwise, the wire would be loopy and you would have a quite messy bracelet. So make your stitches tight. As I said, it might feel a bit awkward at first, but bear with me. In a few rows, you will get used to working with wire, and it's not really that complicated at all. This is row 1. See, just plain row, we knit all stitches and we have same 4 stitches on the right hand needle. Turn your work. Let's move on to row 2. That's going to be the bead row, the row where we actually slip beads between stitches. And the row 2 would be knit 1 stitch, place a bead. So what it means, you take one of those beads that we put on the wire before and slide it so that it stays between these stitches. So after stitch 1, then you knit another stitch and make sure the bead stays between these 2 stitches, like this. Now slide another bead and knit another stitch. And one more bead and knit the last stitch. And that would be our row 2. In each bead row, we insert 3 beads. Let's take a look at our row. See, the last stitch is being stubborn. Because I make them tight, it's not always easy to actually knit them, but it's just for now because we're just setting up the row. After every bead row, pull the bracelet down. For now, we don't have a lot to pull down because it's still very small, but when the bracelet grows, pull it down to form the stitches and make sure the beads are distributed evenly and they stay between stitches. That's our pattern repeat, rows 1 and 2. Turn your work and repeat these rows until you have 56 rows altogether, and that's gonna be 28 lines of beads. So now we have just one line. When we have 28, we would basically complete the bracelet. We would just have to finish it off. But before that time comes, keep repeating rows 1 and 2, the plain row and the bead row. And this is my last row, row 56, and that's 28 rows of beads. If you look at your work, you will see those rows of 3 beads, and when you count them, you should have 28. If you are making a longer bracelet, then make a few more repeats, but remember that the bracelet is stretchy. Keep that in mind when you plan the length of your bracelet. Finish with the row 2 of the pattern, that's the bead row, so that's what I've done just now, and we are ready to move on to the next step. Step 4. Join the knitted piece into a circle. This is the last step. We knit the bracelet, now we're just going to join it to look like a bracelet, not like just a piece of knitted fabric. Maybe you notice that the bracelet twists a bit. That doesn't matter at all. It won't show once we finish it off, so don't worry about that at all. Before we start stitching the bracelet, we need to leave a tail about 10 inches, 25 centimeters long, and cut the wire. And it doesn't have to be exactly 25 centimeters, just approximately 25 is good. See, I have 3 beads left. Those are the beads, the extras that I put on the wire when I threaded the beads on the wire. I don't need them anymore, so I just removed them. Now, keep the open stitches on the needle. Don't do anything to them yet. Take your long tail and thread it into a sewing needle. Then align the cast on edge with the open stitches. Make sure the bracelet is not twisted. When you put it flat, it shouldn't be twisted like that, for example, so that's bad. Make sure it's not twisted, align the edges, and then stitch the cast on edge to the open stitches. First, insert the sewing needle into the first stitch on the cast on edge. You don't really see the stitches on the cast on edge because it's quite loopy, but just go into any loop somewhere on the very edge of the bracelet, and then insert the sewing needle into the first open stitch, pull the wire through and slip the open stitch off the knitting needle. Then go into the second stitch on the cast on edge, again approximately somewhere the second stitch, then into the second stitch of the open stitches, pull it through and slip it off the needle. Do the same for the third stitch on the cast on edge and the third open stitch. Oh, my wire just got out of the sewing needle, so I'm gonna fix that and pull it through. The stitch goes off the knitting needle, and we do the same thing for the last stitches, the cast on edge and the open stitch. Pull it through. Secure the wire by making an extra stitch at the very edge of the bracelet, and then insert the sewing needle into that stitch and pull really tight. Remember, like with all knots, make them really tight. Now remove the sewing needle, and at this point your two tails should meet. They should be at the same side of the bracelet. Then you simply tie them with a square knot and pull tight, and then trim the ends as close to the knot as possible. That's when you need your scissors. So simply trim the tails really close to the knot, so you don't have any little tails hanging there, because you don't want to hurt your wrist. Your bracelet is ready. You can put it on. I hope you enjoyed making it.